in that moment, I felt her spirit come through me.
Mm.
And what I felt her say to me, and I feel it right now as I'm saying that, what I felt her say to me is, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay. And it was, I knew literally in that moment, I'm like, there is another side. We do. And I lost my fear of dying
Wow.
because I knew Patrice was there.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough. I'm super excited about our guest today. You will recognize her, but before we go there, I want to remind you to like and comment and subscribe to the channel. That helps us reach more people and helps us spread more love and goodness in the world. So, super delighted to welcome back to the show, Bernadette Thompson. Hi,
Hi,
Bernadette.
hi, Julie. I'm very excited to be here. You know that.
Yeah, your original episode that we did is one of our top 5 episodes.
Wow.
I don't even think I had told you that, but yeah, it was one of our most listened to episodes. So
Right.
super excited to have you back. And we have you back because you have a brand new book out,
Mm.
Ancestors with Ancestral Whispers. And I'll read the full title, How My Husband's Passing Unveiled My Spiritual Inheritance. And it's a beautiful book. It's absolutely gorgeous in every way. It's a beautiful message. I just loved it. And it's so accessible because it's not a long read, it's a very accessible read. And so I really appreciated that. But um first of all, tell us a little bit about you. If people haven't seen your first episode, we'll link the first episode here also, but tell us a little bit about you and about your journey writing a book.
Mm. So the little bit about me, it's funny. I'm going to go to my background has been working. My professional background was working with kids with grief and trauma in a middle school for years and years and years. And then I had something that changed my life. And I also, I should say, have always loved ancestry. So it was one of my sidekicks that I loved to do. So that was my normal life. I love to do ancestry, really love the stories. And, I worked with middle school kids that really struggled with trauma. And I experienced my own trauma. My husband came to me this one day to say, I have a problem. And the problem was, he said that, he was struggling with alcohol. And I knew at that moment what he was saying to me is, I'm an alcoholic and I can't fix this. My stomach just dropped, and I knew that my life had changed in that moment
Yeah.
because for him to have come to tell me that. So that was when everything kind of turned upside down. And that's when the ancestors came in to me and began to let me know they were there as I reached out to them to let me know I was there. They were there to help me through this really difficult challenge.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think about it. And even in the book, I kind of go from, okay, this is who I was. And this is the moment that life changed for me. And then, as the title says, as David's illness progressed, and he did pass away about 4.5 years later, my spiritual awakening began. And
Yeah.
so it's all kind of connected, but it really is that moment that he came to me, and I remember standing in the kitchen telling me, I have a problem.
Yeah.
And
Those are moments you don't forget.
yeah,
Yeah. It's
exactly.
fascinating to me how intertwined, and we're going to talk about this as we talk about your book, but it's fascinating to me how intertwined grief and spiritual awakening
Yes.
can be. It's
And
really,
trauma.
really fascinating. Hmm.
Yeah.
And your work in the middle school, I just can't imagine a work more challenging and more impactful.
Yes.
I mean, that's just such a like I know for me, even in my life, as a middle schooler, that was a very pivotal time in my life. Middle school, early high school
Yeah.
were just very, very pivotal times. So, let's go back a little bit because you introduce your childhood in the book,
Yes.
and if there's something that stands out that you'd like to share with us about your childhood and how that informed your spirituality as you moved forward in life, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I began to write the book, I was like, thinking that, okay, I should include some things from my childhood. And it really kind of wrote itself because I came from a big family. I was one of eight surviving. There were 10, then we lost two as infants. Big Irish Catholic family. So, and I was the sixth one. So I was two from the bottom. So I was born into a chaotic family. There was no question about it. But it was a loving family, and it was my childhood was heavily surrounded by the Catholic Church because that's who, we were Bernadette Margaret Teresa O'Brien is my maiden name, and we were just a big Irish Catholic family. That's the best way to put it. But I didn't never thought of myself as spiritual during that time. And I went through all the usual things. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten all the way through college, but
Wow.
it was never, my family was never a family that was so strict about it. They were very open. We definitely had these Catholic roots, but we were very open. So I had kind of a normal life. And spiritual wise, we were taught, for Catholics, it's like, okay, you can pray in one direction, but nobody's coming back to you. Nobody's going to talk to you. So
Interesting. Interesting.
yeah.
So you
And
didn't have really any training or acknowledgement of like a communication, like a back and forth
no.
communication.
None. And even, I grew up, my sister had a Ouija board. This was a time when people were like, she did a seance, all this stuff. And I was like, no, I'm like, this is not good. So, so I grew up with that knowledge that people, were curious and wanted to, is the table knocking and, that kind of thing. Um, but never with the idea that this was something that I would encounter in my life, and not only encounter, but that it would become such a huge part of my life. And then the rest of childhood was just very normal. It was an ordinary life. And, I went to college and I wanted to get married. I mean, although I didn't get married right out of college. I did do some exploring, but and then I met my husband. So everything was what most people, they might say, well, that's a pretty vanilla life,
Yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a theme or a thread through the book was like you were Bernadette who wanted to live an ordinary life. You
Yeah,
were just kind of on the track to live this ordinary life, and it kind of turned
yeah,
out a little different than you expected.
yeah,
Um, One of the stories that you share in your book is about your friend Patricia.
yeah.
Share a little bit about your experience with Patricia and what happened and how that kind of maybe opened your eyes a little bit.
Yeah. Patricia, the best way to share it is Patricia passed away. She was young. She was the mom of two little kids, and we were preschool moms together. And she went to sleep one night and didn't wake up.
Wow.
And she was actually pregnant with her third child at the time.
Wow.
And so it was she and I we had done so much together, but what happens when you leave preschool and go into kindergarten, the girls ended up in different schools because it was just where we lived in
Hmm.
the area. So we had a good friendship, but then it started to like break away, not break away, but just life got in the way. There
Right.
wasn't anything like,
You
and
didn't have the same proximity, so it's like,
yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah.
people can really relate to that because we've all had these amazing friends at different times of our life. And then when it kind of fades away, there's a little bit of grieving for it, even, even though maybe you were part of the reason why it didn't continue,
Mhm.
because it was hard to stay together. And that's really what happened. So she and I just kind of had lost contact. It was like, oh, you're supposed to call me. I'm supposed to call, one of those things. And then it never happened. And then the time I got a call one day and they said that, she had passed away. And
Wow.
I was in, I was in shock. I couldn't believe that this had happened. I had connected with her, a little bit before, and we had kind of said, okay, we'll try and get back together. But then she was gone. And I remember, yeah, going over to her husband's house, and he was nothing would have told you. She had an ordinary day the day talking about ordinary. She had an ordinary day the day before, and she just didn't wake up the next day. And when they did, an autopsy to see, there really was no dramatic thing that they could say other than her heart stopped. So it
Wow.
wasn't like she had some, oops, sorry, that she had some disease that they just didn't know about. And so what happened was the grief was so palpable for me. I mean, I had lost my grandparents had died a long time ago, and just recently, not recently, but I'd lost my great aunts and uncles, and so I knew grief, but I didn't know this grief.
Yeah.
And that was what was so compelling, is that I could barely, it was so hard to just move through life. And so this one day, and moms will understand this. This one day, my daughter, who was her daughter's friend, my little 7-year-old, said to me right before she was supposed to get on the bus, "Oh, I need a picture of the whole family." And
Right before she's supposed to get on the bus.
yeah, it's like five
That's
minute
the way it
buses
works,
coming.
right?
Right. So I'm going through the pictures of what I knew, and and this is when we had pictures, and I'm like, I know there's a picture in here. I know there's a picture in here, and suddenly I found her picture. I found Patricia's picture, and I didn't even know I had it, and it was a picture from a previous birthday party, and in that moment, I felt her spirit come through me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I felt her say to me, and I feel it right now as I'm saying that, what I felt her say to me is, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay. And I knew literally in that moment, I'm like, there is another side. We do. And I lost my fear of dying
Wow.
because I knew Patrice was there. So Patricia
Yeah.
was there. Yeah, I knew she was there.
Wow.
So yeah, it was
That's
amazing.
that's an amazing, and that to me just speaks to the power of this type of connection,
Right,
because in a moment you have a life-altering experience.
right,
It's not like, weeks and weeks of trying to figure things out and move through things. It's like it's just in that moment you
right,
have this powerful message. It's essentially like this brief line of communication, and all of a sudden everything changes. I
yeah,
imagine your heart just felt so relieved and happy in that moment to know that she's okay and to know that you're okay, like
yeah.
together, that the relationship was okay, that there was no, you know, I imagine you felt some guilt about not having
Oh,
stayed connected and wishing you'd
so
had more time with her, you know.
that's what the "you're okay" was. You're
Mm,
okay. We're okay. Us together. We're okay. You know, and I mean, I could talk an hour just on my relationship with this, how impactful this was. But just to give you an idea, so she passed away. I'm trying to even think what year. I mean, it's a long time ago. So at least, well, Carol, yeah. So about 15 years ago or a little bit more that she passed away. And I took that picture and I put it on my refrigerator. And that picture followed me everywhere. And I just recently, well, in the last couple of years, moved out to Los Angeles. And the other day, I was in the closet and there was a bunch of stuff, and all of a sudden, her picture pops up again. And
Wow.
it's like, I don't even know how it ended up in a group of, I mean, it's just so that people know that spirit continues to stay with us and continues to connect with us in ways that we don't expect.
Yeah, and help us evolve. When you mentioned that about her picture, you finding that picture recently, I thought she's here celebrating your book. You know, she's part of it.
Yes.
She's part of the experience of your
Yeah.
book. And so, yeah. Um, Share with us a little bit about your thoughts about grief and spiritual signs and how grief affects our ability to see spiritual signs and how that
Mhm.
evolves. Anything that you want to say about that, share about that piece.
So it's so interesting because, I'm also trained in grief. I'm an end of life doula and have had, a lot of training around both grief and trauma. And so my thoughts about it is that, grief, that really painful grief, we've been taught, I was taught when when somebody dies, they're gone, and so it is your job to learn how to deal with it, and that grief is what it feels like as you're trying to make sense of the fact that this person who you love dearly is no longer with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so often there is this, and a lot of it is what you've been taught, that there's no way that we can connect with them, that there's no, that it's just not possible. And for a lot of people, that grief keeps them in a place where they don't want to even try and seek out the other side because they don't want to be disappointed again. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want to, uh, say, oh, I can connect with them and then not feel anything and feel like I have to go through this all over again. So I think that's where some people will stay if they don't get a chance to open that up a little bit more. And trauma is one of those things that sometimes, and grief is trauma. Whenever you lose somebody, it is trauma. It can break open that window a little bit, and you may begin to experience a few things that, because, and I know this is going to sound a little crazy, but
Mm-hmm.
because you're already feeling crazy when you're experiencing some of these things that may begin to be a connection with the other side, you're like looking at it saying, it's just because I'm crazy. It's just because I'm going
Mm-hmm.
through this grief. This is where, and and it's okay when you're in that. But if you can allow yourself to begin to learn a little bit about, as you were saying, about the science of being able to connect with others on the other side, you may begin to see that you've had this connection and that they've been here showing you that they're here. And that's a step towards helping it break open even more. Is that
Yeah.
helpful?
Yeah, that's really I really like the way that you shared that because I think it's that I've never really thought about that. Like both of us have this grief background, but I've never really thought about that like connected to that feeling of crazy that comes with grief because you're so off balance and then kind of connecting that with any experiences that you may have and also having that a little bit of that wall like it's the grief can kind of block those experiences and as a community and as a society I think it's less so now, but there's been a lot of fear around it too. It's not just that it's not possible, it's that it's dangerous to try to
Yeah.
connect.
And I think that grief, the way that grief blocks us, is because we have been taught that you can't,
Mm,
or the grief that is like, if I can't have them here in person, I don't want to talk to them on the other side.
mm,
But that's usually the very intense beginning of the grief.
right.
And when we are able, and to anybody who's going through that right now, to just be so kind to yourself, because when you process it, your body processes it, you can get to that point where you can become a little bit more open, and then it can be a doorway to a bigger opening. Uh,
Yeah.
and but not to feel badly or feel something about yourself that I can't do it, and feel that, okay, so why can't I and why can other people? It's
Yeah.
that's where as you were just saying, this little bit of a block comes in.
Yeah, I like that. It's more of like a softening to the idea and a softening to the, you know, not have certain expectations either direction.
Right.
Not have it, like let go of the fear around it, but also let go of like expectations that it's going to show up a different way. Because even when before we started recording, we talked about how differently we all experience this type
Hmm.
of communication. It's different for every person, just like life is different for every person.
Right.
Our connection to the other side is different for every person. I so you had this experience with Patricia, and then was it when your husband was ill, was that kind of the next piece, or was there something in between that um
So that is really interesting, because there wasn't a lot in between. There was curiosity, and I started to read books, things like that. But I was a mom with three little kids,
right,
and it was mom time, and it was just doing all those things. And I wasn't a practicing Catholic, and Patricia opened me to this, her nickname was Patrice. So Patricia opened me to this awakening, or this knowing that there was another side. But the reality was, I just was in the middle of being a mom. And
hmm,
it was when he came to, well, it was, yeah, when he came to me and told me how sick he was. I knew as I said before, I knew in that moment that this was life changing. And as he got sicker, I went back to prayer, and I went back to using the rosary, leaning on my Catholic roots, even though I wasn't a practicing Catholic. But the rosary, it crosses many different beads and mantras, cross many different spiritual traditions. And it is because it can bring you into a meditation, even when you're not trying. And so I did that many, many times in order to calm myself down. And it was during one of those it was during that time that I was heavily relying on the rosary, that my ancestors came to me. And that is when my awakening began to truly open. So even before David had passed away, my awakening was starting.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
they were assisting you in your anticipatory grief, but also the grief that you were experiencing with his
Yeah.
illness and the challenges that you were
Yes.
experiencing with his illness. You also have mentioned a story in your book that another friend who was not as open and at this period in your life, and how she mentioned something about, mediums, and everyone has a Bob in their family, So share a little bit about what happened there,
Oh,
because I found it really.
Yeah, it was hilarious. So I had this friend of mine, and she almost would make fun of me because she knew that I was at this point. She was very close to me during this time that I was going through this with with David. So um, and she knew that I said I connected with, like, my parents would send me signs. And so John Edward, who's an East Coast medium, many people have heard of him. We came to town. I was living in Vermont at the time. So she goes, "We're going to see him." And she bought my ticket. And she was trying to, what she wanted to do was prove that this was all hooey, that there was nothing. And so I remember literally we're sitting down and she's like, "And I don't want him to say, oh, there's a Bob in your family. Everybody's got a Bob in their family." So. And she said, "I want him to hear, is there a Francis or a Frank or something?" And that's because my dad's name was Francis. So she didn't want to hear, and it's true. I had an Uncle Bob. So if he had said, "There's a Bob in your family," um, and so that was what that's what she said. And so so he comes out. So John Edward comes out, and he's actually the one that told me about using the rosary. He was the one that uses it as a meditation before he would read an audience. And
Uh,
so, he shared that. And then he came out and he said, "Well, how I begin and how I get here um, hear things. The first thing will happen is I will get like a sound for a name, like an F as in Frank or or Phil." So the very first name that he says in the whole thing was Frank, and she almost fell off her chair. She just looked at me like,
We're listening to you.
so, which was really, I know, even though she's still not a full believer, I know that that opened the window for her a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah.
It was just like, how, how would he pick the F and for a call? And the first one was Frank. No, so
That's really cute. Um, One of the things that you mentioned in your book was this idea of not religious but spiritual. And you had a description about that I just found. In fact, I took a note that says feeling awe and wonder. Like that is such a spiritual experience. Share a little more about your thoughts around spirituality beyond the religious part of it. Like you were using the rosary. It's interesting to me because you have this Catholic background, so you have this ritual that you
mhm.
experienced as a child and growing up and into college and so forth, and that became a meditation practice for you.
Right.
So you brought that ritual with you, but you used it in a little different context. So
Yeah.
what is your philosophy on spirituality?
So that you just said that so beautifully. So one thing I want to say is that we often think that we have to leave behind everything. And when we switch from, okay, I'm not really following that religion anymore. So, okay, now I'll go be spiritual, and spirituality looks like this. The reality is any seeking that we have done in our lives, um, about whatever it is, source, God, whatever it is on the other side that has you questioning or wondering. Anything that we have done has been part of our spiritual journey. And so it allows us, as we continue on our spiritual journey, to bring the parts that we resonate with, to bring them with us. When David was so sick, I went to Al-Anon, and anybody who's had addiction or alcoholism in their life, it was a great organization for me. And one of the things they taught me was, take what you like and leave the rest.
Mhm.
Like, you don't have to take everything that you're, just let it resonate with you. And so for spirituality, we are all on an amazing spiritual journey. If you're sitting here listening to this conversation that we're having, you are even higher on, in that spiritual journey because you're seeking people who are having these conversations. And, the awe and wonder, there is so much when I go back to look at who I was as a child and going into my early adult, teenage years. And it was, looking at the sky, looking at the stars, like all of this was making me feel a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And um, and so I feel that we all seekers, even if we seek in an area that we realize that it wasn't what we wanted, and there are things that we feel um, that were difficult about, that it's still we took something with it, whether it was just the knowledge that, okay, that wasn't the right direction, or, okay, there's some in there that I really like, and I'm bringing that with me. So that's where I am, that we're all on an individual path. And just what we said, as we awaken differently, we also become our open to our spiritual beings in each in a different way.
Yeah. I would love to hear more about like one of the things that you highlight in the book. And I'm just gonna say again, you need to get the book, Ancestral Whispers, because there's so much in this book about your experience, but also you shared some really valuable insights into how, as an individual, each of us can have these experiences and also recognizing that everyone's going to have different experiences. That's why I love having these conversations. I actually just read my opening to mediumship and spirit communication all started when my brother passed away, but really, really ramped up after my children passed. And but I was just recently reading about a medium whose opening started when her child was born. Just that awe and wonder, right? Like
Yeah.
just that like opening of spirit and meditation and just having those quiet moments. We live in such a noisy world, and spirit speaks at such a
Yeah.
very subtle,
Hmm.
subtle energy. I'm wondering, like, because this is the work you do, spirit
Yeah.
communication. So what did that look like for you? Because I know it's a
So
slow
It,
opening, or it can be quick, it can be whatever
you
you
know
need
what?
personally.
What's so fascinating about that is you're so correct about how we all open up. I felt this deep urge, and I know it was part of my spiritual awakening, about like ancient civilizations. And when you're talking, talking as a child, looking up at the stars. I mean, the stars still, the universe, um, is an incredibly spiritual thing for me. I and for some people it's not astronomy, but astrology. Like, I love astrology, but it's the ancient part of the stars that I get drawn to. And
Mhm.
that's where I started, reading books, and then one book would lead me to another book. So it was somebody else that had an interest in kind of what I had an interest in. And a lot of that of my awakening came from book after book after book, um, there because at the time nobody was talking about this. I
Mhm.
didn't, you and I didn't know each other. And now that we are in a community of people that we can talk about this anytime we want, and talk about how um, our personal awakenings and what it was. But mine was slow. It was a slow going. It was just this curiosity. I call it the itch you can't scratch. Like
Mm,
it just kept wanting to open. And then when David's illness hit, and then I was thrown, my world turned upside down. I was thrown into a life that was completely different than anything I thought it would have been. Um, that I was a little more prepared because I had already been on this seeking path. And when my ancestors came to me and said to me, "We're here, we're with you," um, I knew that they were like Patrice. I knew that they were with me, and that was really helpful in me opening even further. So we all anybody that's out there, whatever it is, because there's so many beautiful spiritual traditions in the world.
mhm.
And if you follow one that is enlightening your heart or making you feel, oh, I just want to know more about this one, keep going, keep doing that, because that's where, you will begin to find the path to your own spiritual awakening and your own, you are in charge of your own spiritual awakening. So,
Yeah. You've got me thinking in a few different directions. And one is when you were talking about that, because I agree, like I'm a reader. I was reading personal development books in high school.
mhm,
I was always a seeker, always a reader.
mhm.
And but also I think that there's a little bit of a tendency, just like with everything in life, to have a little spiritual envy. And when we hear somebody's story, we think, oh, well, I don't have the gift or I don't have the ability because that particular thing didn't happen.
Right.
And yet, like in your book, you're talking about these different ways that people,
Yeah.
these different signs that we can be given. I'm curious if you did you experience that spiritual envy as you were reading different books and
Oh, yes. Completely, completely. And it wasn't until actually we were just talking about her before. I had a mentor, Rebecca Ostel Clausen, and her book, which is Changemaker, how my brother's death woke up my life. I had done some work with her, and this was now what would you going to take me to like David died in 2017, and now this is COVID. And you were just making me think of it. I ended up going to a spiritualist church during COVID online because I was just looking for people that maybe believed what I believed. I mean, that was like totally out of my comfort zone to
right,
try something. It's like reading a book that you're like, I don't know if I should be reading that book, but you do it because, um, and
because spirit urges you forward.
exactly. And so Becky's journey was she had shamanic journey. Her journey was so different from mine. And so I kept thinking, it's not going to happen for me. It's not going to happen for me. I have a guide now. I've had a guide for 5 years,
Well,
over 5 years.
just to clarify, you've had a guide your whole life.
That's true.
Your
Exactly.
awareness of your
I am
guide.
connected with my guide now. And it came in a way where I pressed forward and did things that I wasn't comfortable with because I'm like, I know that they're there. I know that there's more for me. And again, it's the yearning. It is the itch you can't scratch, and it just has you like, I have to keep seeking a little bit more, but don't worry about doing it in a way that is um I don't want anybody to be frantic about it because it does take some time, but it does open faster than you think it does. For many of us, we look back and say, "Oh, I really was already open there. I wouldn't accept it or I wouldn't acknowledge it."
Yeah.
And I go back to childhood and I see things along the way that I know were spirit connected. So,
Right. Well, and it's so fascinating because even in my own experience, I had these experiences that were just no other explanation. except for their spirit was involved somehow. And then I would be hungry for more. So it was just this constant like seesawing
Yes.
between experiences totally unexpected, totally not seeking that particular experience. But, spirit would bring another experience, and then I would be seeking, and then I would have the spiritual envy, and then I would have the resistance. It's all over the place. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
so for those of you that are listening, just know that it's all over the place and it's
Yeah.
okay. Like the more I have found that the more that I just relax into
Uh-huh.
it and just say, like I am okay right where I'm at
Yeah.
and I'm open to explore. So,
Well,
holding those two pieces.
and it's funny, the exploration for me, one of the things that opened it up for me, and we haven't really talked about it, is the ancestry. That my love of ancestry began because I love stories. I come from storytellers. I love stories. And so when I began to do my ancestry, I did it the way a lot of people, oh, how far can I go out on the tree? Um, but when David got sick, I delved more into the stories. And that was when the ancestors really, I began to feel their presence around me. And first, I had a great aunt that came to me in a visitation, and she said to me, "We hear your prayers," because they heard me. I used to sit around saying the rosary, imagining them at a table with me, and so there was that, and then I had a great grandmother, an Irish great grandmother, come in and channel the rosary through me, and so those things started to happen. But the whole ancestral world um, is a place for people. The stories of our ancestors is a place for us to begin that spiritual exploration. And one of the reasons it is, they are part of our family and they've crossed and they are here to help us and guide us along our journeys. And when we begin to look back, we will often feel a connection with them. I wrote about your connection with an ancestor in your life, um, that they know they're watching us. They know what we've been through, and they're not only here to guide us in this life, but they're here to help us open
Mhm.
to more and to our spiritual to the spiritual beings that we are.
Yeah. I honestly, when I read your book, I had completely forgotten that because you reached out and you said, is it okay if I share that story that you shared? Because I'm also a genealogist. I've also been a researcher of ancestral lines and this story you shared just briefly in my great aunt. So I was visiting my grandmother, and this was after my children had died, and I was still in very deep grief. And I was visiting my grandmother, and she mentioned her aunt. And she mentioned her Aunt Sarah and how she loved her Aunt Sarah. And I had never really heard her talk about Aunt Sarah before. Well, then come to find out, my grandmother's talking about how when she was when Aunt Sarah was a young woman, she had married someone who ended up deserting her shortly after she had her first daughter, who she named Sarah Lee. And her daughter was then killed in an automobile accident in the 1920s on the streets of Jacksonville. I'm originally from Florida. My ancestry is in Florida and Georgia. And when she shared that story, there was something that, and I until this moment, I didn't fully understand what was happening in that moment. Because when she shared that story with me, I felt this connection with my Aunt Sarah. And I looked her up, and as a genealogist, I went back and I looked up her information. I had some from the story, but like I added her daughter to the family tree and I added the story to the family tree. And I actually researched her first husband, who was a foreigner that she had married, who ended up leaving. And I found him. He had gone off to California. You know, that's a long ways from Florida, and said he was coming back, but didn't. But I think what really impacts me now, thinking about that story, is how my grandmother talked about how this was her favorite aunt because this aunt gave her so much love and attention, gave her nieces and nephews so much love and attention. And I think I feel like that opened a window of hope for me that I could still be a wonderful person living a wonderful life, even though I'd had this tragedy in my life. And to me that was just and ever since then there's been times where I have felt
Yeah.
Aunt Sarah, like I feel like I know her. I feel like I know her heart. I feel like
Yeah.
um I certainly can appreciate the pain that she experienced in this
Yeah.
life and the challenges that she faced.
And that's so important because um, you it gives you don't feel alone, and there's this family connection that is when I looked back at my great aunts and the life that they had gone through coming from, they were uh, children of Irish immigrants, famine immigrants, and the poverty, the and orphanages, all kinds of things. And when I was reading that while I was in the throes of David's illness, which had nothing to do with each other, when you look at it, but it was like the strength of them continuing and moving through. I knew these great aunts; they were like my grandparents, and my they were one was a little bit of a curmudgeon, but the other one was like, well, full of fun. And it's like and I didn't know those stories until my parents had died. They had all been gone. And I discovered that story when David was sick and I was researching them even more. And so
Yeah.
that was something. So there's this way of leaning on our ancestors in a way that can really bring some strength to you, especially
Mhm.
in grief,
Mhm.
especially in grief. So,
Yeah, for sure. Anything else that you'd like to share about your journey or the book or the process of writing the book, or what would you like to share as we get ready to close, and also share where people can find you?
yeah. So I think our conversation has been wonderful, and I think that whoever's listening, both of us, the two of us have been through difficult times and awakenings in different religious, situations where we grew up with, and we have gone through this process. And if you were to map out our processes, they'd be completely different. But here we are, and we feel this incredible love and kinship for each other because we know that if you follow this, if you that the opening is there, and it's not a wide open right away, but you'll find that there are things that will show you that, okay, there are little signs. And you can I do work with people to help them the name of my company is Tell Me Our Story Ancestral Healing, and it's tellmeourstory.com. And it's from the point of view of the child asking the parent to tell me our story and to begin to know where we came from and who we are, so that as we go through this life and we have challenges and things that are really difficult, that we just know more about where that resilience is, and we know that they're there on the other side helping us. So I
Mm,
think that's probably,
yeah, I love that. I feel like a lot of times our ancestors, those people close to us who are on the other side, they're really that bridge
yes,
between us and that spirit realm, like that higher
yeah,
self.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
I
you
would
so
just,
much.
yeah,
Oh,
I
go
do want
ahead.
to say one quick thing. The spirit is fun too. Like just we've had this very serious and beautiful and spiritual conversation, but spirit is also fun. So and so is looking for your ancestors. So I want people to know that you know that it can be fun too. Sorry.
For
I just threw
sure.
that in.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that because we can take all of this so seriously.
Yeah.
And we just need to loosen up and, not feel like we have to check boxes in order to be spiritual or,
Yeah.
in fact, one of the questions I ask, all my guests, and I've asked you before, I'll ask you again, what are some of the spiritual practices that you enjoy
Mhm.
that help you feel connected?
I do a lot of meditation, but I don't do meditation like I have to be there. I have to be that I have to block everything out of my, um, but I do, I love sound healing. Sound healing is, so I will listen to a sound healing meditation and allow myself to just settle back into my body. Like all of you, there are times every day that I am like, I feel like I'm on fire, that there, anxiety, whatever it is, what I'm facing, what do I have to do? And I will push myself to know that if I go back into my spiritual self, and I don't sit in position. I often lie on the couch with headphones in. So I don't want anybody to think that, I mean, some people really love sitting in position and that's very comfortable. It just doesn't work that well with my body. So I don't do that. But that I would say that is, and continue to seek is one of the things that I do, is just, whatever it is you get drawn to, look it up, you know.
I love that. Yeah. Personalizing our
Yeah.
experiences and allowing spirit and our guides to guide us to what is going to be most beneficial that day or that week and
Yeah.
not be so,
Perfect.
yeah.
That day or that week. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here again, Bernadette. So lovely to see you as always and love your book. Love what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks.